Hello, viewers. I'm Vibhuti Jha. This is Jaipur Dialogue USA. Thank you for joining us today. Please like, subscribe, and support our channel. And today we are going to talk to you about the impending question: who will win the White House? Now it is, just a few days remaining. Literally, we can say a few hours remaining from people casting their votes. Many people have already cast their vote in early voting and, electronic early voting and mail-ins, and the last 2 days are remaining. So what must we do to make sure that our votes count and our views matter? To talk about this specific issue, I have great pleasure in welcoming two wonderful minds, two great analysts who produce evidence for what they believe in. Let's welcome Mohan Sonti and Mr. Rahul Sur. Great to
Namaste,
have you again back here.
everyone.
So thank you. So I'm just back from India. Sometimes I feel I'm still there. My time zone operates in a weird way. So welcome to the show. I'll shoot off with you, Rahulji. That one of the things in the last 2 days will be the role of the media. How the media is playing the game. Two, three examples come to mind very quickly. One is that how the media reported on the famous statement made by Trump, in which he said that Liz Cheney is a warmonger, war hawk, and she doesn't know the difference. She is willing to sacrifice people, young people, to their lives. If only she faced a 9-barrel gun to her face, then she would know what it means to be a war. And how Kamala Harris said that, oh my God, that is an attempt and a call to assassination. He should be disqualified from there. Subsequently, I also noticed that many channels came back very strongly on Kamala Harris and the Democratic Party team, saying that that is machination and manipulation of not telling the truth. That was a welcome sign. So, media will play its game, including the famous statement apparently about the Puerto Ricans in the rally that Trump had, made by somebody else, not him. But these are all matters of perception that plays into a role. And then there is another thing which I wanted you to take into account before commenting, is that how Trump has managed to totally change the narrative media game by not going on mainstream media platforms where he was treated unfairly and going on to PBD podcasts, Joe Rogan podcast, and flagrant podcasts where he went unscripted for hours, and people loved him for that. And many people said, geez, he is absolutely human, like you and I. So that was a very interesting thing. He created a new band of followers and voters who may have probably not voted for him. How do you see that play out?
So, Vibhutiji, thank you very much for that question. I think that, when we are looking at the media, the one which you said right now is a moment in time. And the example which you've given, of course, is very accurate, because anyone who was listening to Trump would have understood that he was talking about, look, you can take decisions only if you put yourself in the shoes of people. And he was suggesting to Ms. Cheney that you cannot take these decisions lightly when you're in a comfortable position. But I think that the issue is, much deeper about the media. And what they have done is an example of their modus operandi. And I just wanted to take it back slightly to give the viewers a more longer term perspective. Now, I remember reading a Sherlock Holmes book, The Adventure of the Silver Blaze, in which there is a conversation between Watson and between Sherlock Holmes. And Watson says, did you notice anything how it happened in the night? And Sherlock Holmes says, there was a curious incident of the dog. And Watson says, but the dog didn't bark. So Sherlock Holmes says, that's precisely what was the problem. That is, the dog didn't bark. So what I'm trying to say is that sometimes there is significance in things not happening. So what I'm alluding to right now is the fact that for the first time, there have been major newspapers that have not endorsed Kamala Harris. A Washington Post, for example, did not endorse it. And Jeff Bezos had explained his reasons in that, saying that the trust in the media has fallen to a very low level, the fact that we are only speaking to ourselves, and that whoever fights with reality loses. So basically, what is the example which you gave is symptomatic of a much deeper malaise which is there in the media, which is a long running malaise. Now, if you go to the other side of the country, for instance, the Los Angeles Times also refused to endorse Kamala Harris. And in this case, the owner of Los Angeles Times, Patrick Chun-Seong, said that he had tasked the board to do a factual analysis of the policies of Trump and Biden when they were in office, and also to do a factual analysis of the policies of Kamala Harris and Trump, so that a side-by-side comparison is given to voters so that they can decide amongst themselves. And then he significantly added, the board chose to remain silent. In other words, what has happened is that the media has now arrogated itself the responsibility of telling the American people what to think instead of being objective. And this has taken a very deep toll on the American psyche, on the American trust in the system. And essentially, the way I look at it is that the mainstream media has four ways in which they deal with their issues, and that is, first is omission, distortion, minimization, and fiction. So any of these four, if you have a look at what has happened, for instance, in the example which you gave, what happened in Ms. Cheney's case is, it is distortion. Right? That is how many of them reported that he was threatening to kill her, etc., etc. Whereas all he was actually trying to do is to point out the importance which the military-industrial complex has on the decisions of people who blithely send their sons and daughters of other people to war. So therefore, American people are slowly seeing through it. And that is the reason why you mentioned that Trump has been successful in reaching out to a much larger population, because he has gone around them, because he is working on the substratum of the fact that the American people's faith in the mainstream media is really down to much more. Hence, the reason that he has been able to put himself forward as a persona, as a living persona, and not the caricature of Hitler, which he is often presented to be.
Thank you. And this is also a very important part, Mohanji. I'll come to you on that. This is a excellent exposition of the media play. Now, we also know that the media is also known to be the fourth pillar, fifth pillar, or ninth pillar of democracy, as it is famously called. Media also has the responsibility of inspiring trust in the process between the executive, judiciary, and legislature. What are we seeing in democracy today is basic attack on the trust in the system, because everybody is using democracy as a tool to flourish their own agenda. It's an agenda-driven community that has become. Democracy has become an agenda-driven exercise every year. So Kamala Harris, every time you ask something, she will say, I belong to the middle class. She probably, as somebody said, she doesn't even know the difference between economics and demand and supply, because she doesn't know it. I'm not expecting her to know it. I'm saying don't pretend that you know and then you say things are stupid. But tell us something more about how is media failing to create trust in the system, or is media deliberately, distorting, as Rahulji just now said, use the word distortion, distorting the truth in the process, because people are relying upon it. And what I will also quickly add here, thanks to medium like us, people are no longer relying upon New York Times and Washington Post for news or views, because they are relying upon alternate sources, because those people have become mistrustful. That's why perhaps CNN also, Jake Tapper of all people, condemned the Kamala Harris campaign for distorting or misrepresenting the statements made by Trump in various forums. Go ahead.
Just the opening, before I start with, there are a few statistics and numbers that I want to talk about. But before that, the fact you mentioned, the media being the fourth, fifth, or ninth pillar, is basically media declaring itself as the fourth pillar. There is no such official term. Basically, media came in and said that there are three pillars of the governance, and they simply inserted themselves and called themselves a fourth pillar, put that in people's mind, and that's how they became the fourth pillar. So said that
The unreliable, unnamed source, so to say, for everybody else.
exactly. So basically, it's self-claiming themselves to be that important, right? But said that there are some statistics that show that these are available online. You can see it anywhere. Just for the current elections alone, apparently about 89 to 90% of all the articles that you find in the so-called mainstream media are anti-Trump, and about 84 to 85% of all the articles are pro-Harris. That the ones that are exclusively about Kamala Ji Harris, about 85% are pro her.
By the way, people are objecting to you calling her Kamala Ji. Okay, by the way, just let you know. Previous program. And don't call her Kamala. She's Kamala.
Okay. Yeah, I just say that way. It's an Indian name, so I just use the word G. But so for Trump, about 89 to 90% were anti-Trump. And this includes, if you include all the Fox News and many other ones, all of them put together, this is a very general estimate, and not that the remaining 10% are favorable to Trump, but it is at least neutral. So under the circumstances, anyone who believes that the media is actually neutral is completely a meaningless argument, because it isn't. And again, back in 2020, remember, we did this campaign and all of that. We had some shows at that time. A sum total of between 2016 and 2020, there were about 15,000 plus articles in the mainstream media in US that were completely and 100% anti-Trump. All of them were like, many of them are baseless. Now, the next point is when a media actually endorses somebody, right? To me, that should be a completely illegal. Because when they talk about it as the fourth pillar and neutral and all of that, and they end up endorsing one side, then it's inherently not neutral. They're already claiming that they are biased, right? So what Jeff Bezos said, the way I read it is, he said the trust in the media is going down. It is actually, they have been endorsing it for the last 50 plus years. So it is just that they have been stealing. It's like saying that I've been stealing, but now people are finding out, and that becomes an issue. It's not that the trust is going down, as in today people are waking up because there is alternate sources like ours here, where people do come out with the truth. So slowly people, when they say people are losing faith in it because they find alternate sources, it's not that they had the faith, it's just that they had no other choice earlier, right? But otherwise, the fact that somebody endorses must itself be illegal. That is no more a fourth pillar. That is basically an extension. It's like an appendage to the party. So should not be considered as an independent pillar to begin with. Same goes with the rest of the media. When they start endorsing things, when they take money, then essentially they are compromised. So for me, that is a problem by itself. So that is how I see the media. And one last point is, in law, they are taught to argue on both sides. So no matter what a person says, people can slice and dice it in a way that they can argue from the other side. Media kind of does the same thing. No matter what Trump says, if they have 90% of the media that is articles and media that is anti-Trump, then essentially it's well-funded, and it's basically making an interpretation of the things that are said, not said, or imaginative, or distortion of the truths. So there is no more an unbiased system to begin with. So
that's a very interesting observation, that the fourth pillar can't be biased, and it ought not be biased. Totally.
And it is not a fourth pillar to begin with. It is right. A self-declared fourth pillar.
Yeah, correct. The other part also is that how the celebrity endorsements matter. And I said they are paid to do what they do, and they are paid to read the script they are given. They don't act on their own. They are directed by a person on the screen. So these are all very show-off kind of a showbiz. It's becoming a showbiz kind of a thing. Coming to the segment part of this, where Indian Americans are very sentimental people. Both of you are familiar with my phrase, combination of sentimental and emotional, making it sentimotional. Hamari Kamala. The people are very enamored by their name. And I personally believe, biased or not biased, I believe that she is not fit to be the president. She may be an absolutely fit person to be an attorney general or whatever, or a senator, but she is not ready to be the president because her grasp of knowledge, her articulation of ideas, still needs training and learning. Having said that, I wanted to ask you about one simple thing, and I'll begin this with Mohanji here. One of the points that overburdens American women, but in Indian American ladies, is, oh, Trump is against abortion, or he is against women's rights. Is that true? Is abortion a woman right issue alone? Because no woman can get pregnant without the help of a man involved in the process. So it is woman's body, absolutely. Nobody questions that. Who she loves and who she doesn't love is her choice, no doubt. What she does with her body is her choice. But there is a complementary role to be played by a man as well. Does his wish count or not? Is it an accountability and responsibility issue, pregnancy? Because gone are the 15th century era where women did not have the adequate knowledge, protection, artificial or otherwise, scientific or otherwise, to prevent pregnancy. Today, in 21st century, every woman has the ability to prevent unwanted pregnancy. So there is an accountability and responsibility issue as well. Your thoughts on that?
Yes, so I just wanted to present a few facts and a few numbers so that the argument becomes a lot more clear, right? So when people are talking about the anti-abortion laws and therefore once the Roe versus Wade is gone, nobody can have an abortion, that is not entirely true. At the same time, when people say, when people are criticizing Trump about saying that the abortions can happen up to 9 months and it's all a lie and all of that. So let's get down to the facts. The facts as it stands today is that about 8 states plus Washington, D.C., the laws actually have no upper limit on when the abortion can be done. Now, that is a fact. Whether it happens in the 9th month or just before the delivery and all of that, we can leave that for a separate debate. But the fact is, the law says up to the 9th month, the day before the birth, the abortion is allowed in 8 states per the law. There are no upper term limits, plus Washington, D.C. All right. Now, what happened? That is first thing that people need to understand. That is a fact. And there are a few states, the rest of the states have different gradient from 6 weeks to 12 weeks and 24 weeks and so on and so forth. So every state had their own little limits and laws. This is as of June of 2024. All right, which is literally a few months ago after the Roe versus Wade was overturned. Now, the second thing that people need to remember is the Roe versus Wade was passed. That is a Supreme Court judgment. Supreme Court, all it does is an interpretation of the law, right? It does not make laws. It basically interprets what's in the Constitution. So in 1973, in the Roe versus Wade, the Supreme Court made, based on the 14th Amendment, it made an interpretation and said, this is how the abortion needs to be, right? All the limits and all of that. So it made an interpretation. Such interpretations can always be overturned. It is something that every American would know it. American people who are interested in the governance would know that a Supreme Court's interpretation, when it's taken back to the court, can always be overturned. And this has happened after the Roe versus Wade was Casey versus Planned Parenthood in 1992, where part of the Roe versus Wade was already overturned. So you could see that is already tumbling. And then came the Dobbs versus Jackson in 2022, when everything was overturned and completely scrapped. So you could see that this is already not standing on a firm ground and it can fall down. People could see it. The Democrats could see it for the last 50 years, 1973 to 2022. It's about 50 years. And they have never passed a law to actually cement it. What they did was they always wanted to have some sort of fear in people's mind that this could be taken away and therefore keep voting for me. They do the same thing for the African Americans and for everybody else. In fact, it's about fear mongering. Even today, the people who don't vote for Trump is not because they know their policies. It's just more about they're terrified about many, many things which are all imaginary and illusion, right? Now, is there a precedence to actually solidifying it? The Plessy versus Ferguson of 1893 and 96 was about the separate but equal law, which was overturned in Brown versus Board of Education in 1953. And once these are Supreme Court judgments, so obviously they can be overturned. So it was overturned in the past in 1953. Then from 1957 onwards, there were 4 civil rights acts that were passed. And so the judgment of the Supreme Court is now put into the law. That nobody can change that anymore, right? Same with Roe versus Wade. What happened in 1973? Immediately, if Democrats really wanted it, they could have actually passed in the laws and solidified it, but they didn't do it for 50 years, for 50. Remember, 1973 to 2022 is 50 years. They have never done it because that is a fear that they wanted to keep in everybody's mind and make sure they know that this can be toppled, but they never passed a bill. To me, that is hypocrisy. They could have done it. They didn't do it. All right. And today, is it a real problem? It really isn't, because what happened now is exactly going back to the states. The federal government has no control over it. It is not a ban. They make it look like it's a ban on abortion. It is not a ban on abortion. Now, instead of one single law for the whole country, you have 50 different laws, one for each state. That's all that they did. If one particular state is conservative, they can make their own laws. This is a typical republic, the way of doing things, because it's a federal republic. So basically, all the states have extra rights. And this actually went back to the states. Now, I'm not saying it should not be a federal law. If it has to be a federal law for 50 long years, you can clearly see Republicans are not interested in that. They don't stand for that. But Democrats who claim to stand for that never passed a law for 50 years. So to me, that is hypocrisy, or I don't know what the real intent is. And today, no, there is no federal abortion ban. What it has is, there is no ban on abortion. It is, instead of one single law for the nation, you have 50 laws for one for each state. That's what it is.
Go
And
ahead
yes,
and make
they
the law.
still have no term limits in some states. It's all the way, like I said, in 8 states plus Washington, D.C., there is no term limit. It can go all the way to 9th month.
Oh, that's the law. Wow.
That's the law.
Rahulji, this
Yeah.
is very interesting. But Rahul, this somewhere on the line, abortion is a real, dividing issue. It polarizes the country, and it's a whole thing is a very sentimental, very emotional, women's body, women's rights, and I have added to that the element of accountability and responsibility. What do you think the country? Why is the country with the two-party system so polarized in its entire conversation? I mean, people are saying, oh, Trump has a foul mouth. That's why I'm not going to vote for him. So I asked very simply, that means you're going to vote for somebody who is totally incompetent. And because he or she is sweet and damaging to you as a policy, how does that make you wise? Talk about the polarization that exists
Yeah.
in this country today.
So
What
actually,
must be done? What must we do to address that?
I'd just like to add a little bit to Mohanji's intervention on abortion and give certain facts and figures. One is that, as you had said, that it requires a male and a female to bring forth life in this world, and the argument is that it is only and completely and exclusively a woman's right about whether she terminates the baby or not. Now, the question is, should we be looking at it that way? Because if you look at the ancient systems in China, in India, there is male and there is female. Both of them are indispensable for the continuation of life. Now, if we accept the argument that it is only a woman's right to decide whether to terminate the child's life, before it comes, then the logical question arises. Suppose, let us take the other side. Let us say a woman says that I want to keep the child, and the man says, I don't want you to keep the child. All right. So she has the child, and once the child comes into this world, the man says, I didn't want you to have the child, and therefore it's not my responsibility at all. So therefore, the logic of this only being a woman's right, if it is given to men, leads to absurd consequences. That a man can simply say, oh, well, you wanted the baby, it's your responsibility. I have absolutely no accountability towards it. I will not pay child maintenance. You are on your own. So therefore, what has happened is there is mass unwisdom in this country. Now, remember that the birth rate in this country has fallen. It has fallen below the replacement levels. And I'd also like to, inform the viewers that a recent study from the Guttmacher Institute, in an organization that supports abortion access, found that the number of abortions in 2023 has increased to the highest number and rate in the US in over a year. Why did this happen? it explains that this nationwide increase in abortion, despite the procedure being banned in 14 states since Dobbs, may be due in part to the quote, the broader availability of telehealth for medical abortion, they said. So therefore, pointing to medication abortion via mail increasing considerably after the Food and Drugs Administration lifted in-person dispensing requirement of mephistrone, one of the drugs most commonly used in medical abortion during the pandemic. In other words, abortion has not decreased, it has increased. And this has to be taken on the broader social context of the declining fertility, right? And this has become a male versus female issue, whereas the common sense answer is that both men and women are implicated in the creation of life. And consequently, the country needs to take a step back and see whether this is the possible way of coming out of this emotional issue, which has become only a woman's issue. But then, from the men's point of view, as I said, how would a society feel if men said, I have no responsibility, it's your baby, and therefore I can just walk free? There would be howls of outrage. So again, the country has fallen into a deep well of unwisdom, as I call it. So that's the something which people may wish to consider, and the fact that there is broad US support in both men and women for keeping abortion legal, and it is an issue which has now been sent to the states where it rightly belongs, where people can exercise their power and influence their legislators. That is what democracy is in action, right? And consequently, it is not that there is going to be a ban, etc., etc. It has been kicked down to the states where it originally belonged. So therefore, the struggles are going to be fought on a state-by-state basis. People have the right to, for instance, go from one state to another. They may not like to live in a conservative state. And also, we found that even in conservative states, people have supported abortion. In other words, they've gone against the abortion ethic, abortion restrictions, and have supported that. That's democracy in action. But it is a very live issue. I don't think it's going to get resolved. But at the same time, I think the country needs to step back and see it as not only a female's issue, but a female and a male societal issue. That's one. Now, coming to the issue of polarization. Polarization, in fact, is very deep, and I would say that one of the reasons in this, especially the media and the think tanks and the money, this is all responsible for pushing, partisan content. If you have a look at the think tanks, for example, the money flows to think tanks which have got a partisan bent, and then scholars are awarded for that, and consequently, it keeps getting deeper and deeper. So the answer to that is, of course, that is the basics of journalism. Who, what, when, where, why, and how. If these questions are not answered by the newspapers, that means it is essentially defrauding the viewers, but not giving it a full picture. And I want to just give some examples about how they do it. The New York Times, in 2018, it said it has been, some years since on the anniversary of 9/11 that planes took aim on the Twin Towers, right? Somebody pointed out it was not planes which took aim, it was Islamic terrorists, right? So therefore, they forgot the important question of who did that. Now, in this case, mainstream media is really thoroughly implicated in this. And what I would urge viewers to do is to go and read some people who have escaped from the New York Times because of their resignations. Barry Weiss, for instance, she was a centrist, and she resigned from the New York Times, and she wrote a scathing letter as to why she had resigned. And she said it's very easy to stay safe out there and to write the 4,000th article on why Trump is a unique threat to democracy instead of trying to say something different. And similarly, Yuri Berliner, when the Hunter Biden story came out, National Public Radio had in fact hidden it. And he said the reason why they hid it is because they thought it would give an advantage to Trump. So basically what has happened in the ruling class is that the price of admission into this ruling class is you must be a card-carrying member of the Hate Trump Club. And this is not what we are saying. This is manifested in the decline of the public trust in these institutions, the fact that the owner of Washington Post has said that, the fact that the owner of Los Angeles Times has said that, and therefore the people who, quote unquote, whose only job is to think, right? They have become the elite, in which the power and money and influence. Donald Trump is a threat to these people simply because he is not a part of the system, although he was. So therefore, the consultants are threatened because he will come up with something more intelligent. Academics can be threatened because he might, shatter their carefully laid theories. Newspapers are threatened because he might connect more with the people in the heartland. And this is, of course, not to say that he has not got his drawbacks, but what I'm saying is that they say, follow the money, baby, right? So the money and the power. And this is a class which is interested in keeping power at all costs. So therefore, I am very apprehensive about, whether the country can come out of it or not. Because after his win in 2016, they never asked themselves a simple question: where did we go wrong? Did we put ourselves in the shoes of those people? Remember that the New York Times had predicted, I think, over a 90% chance of Hillary Clinton becoming elected. So they were that disconnected from the reality. And I am rather pessimistic about the possibility of this country being able to emerge from these deep, deep divisions when so many intellectuals and think tanks and people who pride themselves in the ability to think are committed to this narrative, and they alone are right.
As I always say, a think tank is a place where thinking gets tanked. So, so that's a challenge that think tanks face among themselves. Having said that, I'm a banker. I have been a private banker and corporate banker, and the trust is the key word. That is an operative word between the client and the banker. So, for example, if I was supposed to do KYC, not knowing what my client's business is, and if the authorities found out that he was a drug dealer, ignorance was not an excuse for me for my not knowing what my client does. The authorities always said, how come you did not figure it out? Where is the money came from? Because you are not supposed to deal with illegal money or unauthorized money or unwanted money. Likewise, in democracy, trust is the key word. You trust your politicians to do the right things. You trust your bureaucrats to do the right things, follow the law. You trust the judiciary to do the right thing by interpreting the constitution. You may have a difference of opinion. You may have a different assessment of the situation, but you can't go wrong on facts. So, Mohanji, coming to this part, how is the trust operating in the system right now? Because what I'm saying there right now is, being in media, being in banking, everybody is trashing the other person of lying, deception, dhokebazi, to put it mildly. So if everybody is deceiving everybody, whose Ardha Satya are we buying?
So, see, the way the dictatorships work, right? Any dictatorship in the world has one key criteria, which is fear. That it has to instill the fear that if you don't follow the law and if you don't follow what I say, then there's going to be a threat of life and other things, right? Mm-hmm. So that is the key idea of a dictatorship. Likewise, for democracy, one of the key ingredient is the trust in the system. Unless people have faith in the system, they have faith in the process of democracy, their institutions, the democracy cannot work. In fact, like America has tried to put instill democracy in many of the Islamic lands, and it doesn't work because they don't have any trust in any of these systems. So this trust is very important in democracy. Now, if we look at the idea of democracy for the voting purposes, right, which is elections is one of the key idea of this democracy for it to run. If you look at the map from 2022, and it has gotten worse since then, about 13 states, and majority of them are not just democratic states, but and today they're also the battleground states. In 13 states, there is not even a voter ID check. In fact, strictly, they don't check the voter ID at all. In some places, it is not enforced. It is once in a while they can check and inspect, but only in few states where it's little more mandatory that they check the voter ID. Voter ID as in the identification, the driver's license, at least, right? I'm not saying that we don't have a voter ID like in India, but you get the idea. So if there are 13 states that have absolutely no checks and balances. Anybody can walk in, and my state is one of them, because I know I just went and I already voted. I just go in, I point my finger and say, this is my name, this is the address. They'll put a check mark and give me the ballot, right? And I've given you my experience in the past too. Basically, they never check anything. So when you have this kind of a system, is there a fraud? Of course, nobody can ever prove it. In fact, I have not seen, just for the technical purposes, right? I have never seen anybody proving a fraud in Saddam Hussein getting 95% of the votes, or even Musharraf getting 90% of the votes in referendum. So it is not about finding a fraud and proving it in court and things like that. So that is not the point. So obviously, we cannot say that all Americans are 100% honest. We are the most honest people. If there is an avenue where a fraud can be committed, then you have to assume that it will be done at some point in some ways, right? And America has the technology and the capability to actually have a proper verification of every individual, make sure they're the citizens and that they are the ones who are voting. But they still don't do it. When they don't do it deliberately, they can give any spins to it about disenfranchisement and things like that. All of that can be plugged in and fixed very easily. And the fact that 13 of those states are democratic states, and some of them are currently the battleground states as well, where there is absolutely no check on voter ID. This is as of 2022. You can check it up online. There is a whole map for that. And it only has gotten worse since 2022 to 2024. We lose the faith in the basic system and institution. I mean, at least people start questioning it, whether it is even valid anymore, right? Now, regarding other institutions, just an observation. I'm not saying there is any problem there, but just an observation. Like even the Fed rates, if you look at it, which is also one of the key institutions, you can see that the Fed rates from the day President Obama took over in 2008, yes, there was a recession. It went down to close to zero. And it remained at zero for all the 8 years. And then Trump comes in and suddenly the interest rate starts going up. And it keeps climbing up until 2020. Of course, again, you have an excuse of COVID when it came down. And in the last 2 years, it has risen again. But last 2 years, we also have an extremely high inflation, one of the highest inflation, right? The only way to contain the inflation, I think Fed rates going up is one of the key factors. I was just wondering, I mean, it's just an observation. I don't know much about economics, but it's just an observation that how come for 8 long years, the Fed rates are absolutely at the bottom. I mean, if you look at the graph, it just goes down, flat line, and then suddenly on 2016, something wakes up and then suddenly the Fed rate starts going up, or just right before 2016. So it's just an observation. When things like this happen, at least there must be some explanation. Otherwise, the trust factor will start gradually eroding. The voter ID is one. These kind of things. And of course, media plays an extremely healthy role when they start endorsing people. Then essentially you're saying, I'm not biased. When they start accepting money, obviously they are not biased. So, and they self-declared themselves as fourth pillar, even though there's no such thing as fourth pillar. They aren't, all right? It's basically public is the fourth pillar. The people voting are the fourth pillar. But anyway, so these are the things that need to be kept in mind. And
who do you think, how do you think that the trust be inspired back? Because if there is no trust, then we are operating in a liar's world, and then it becomes a threat.
So I would say, yes. So a few things that can be done is to instill the confidence, we need to have a proper voter ID check, some ID that actually maps it to the citizenship. As far as 1996 Illegal Immigration Act is concerned, that is when there is one line that talks about the citizens being able to vote. Other than that, we do not have, in entire Constitution does not have a word called democracy, and there is no place in anywhere in the Constitution or any amendments that you talk about the citizenship's right to vote. The voting is a process that is left to the states. So technically, the states can abolish voting altogether, in theory. I'm just saying. So that is the extent of the laws that exist. The only way it can be done is if we have a federal mandate that says a verification of citizenship is a must, and that must be mapped to the vote, to the individual who is voting. If this is done, I think the trust levels will skyrocket and everybody will be very happy with it. All right. The disenfranchisement can be addressed by simply adding more people. I mean, that can always be done. Right. Second is the media. Media, anyone who takes the money, who endorses people, must be just legally banned. They should be thrown out, because how can you endorse a person and call yourself an independent thinker there? I mean, you don't endorse anyone and you don't take money from people. Once you start taking money directly from the political parties, and then you're no more a neutral candidate. It's a conflict of interest. So I think some of these actions can be very
That's a
easily.
that's a very, very valid point. But one thing which I wanted to ask both of you going forward, given the time and the nearness of the vote, my thought process is that people are selfish. You vote for your consideration, I vote for my considerations, and Rahulji will vote for his considerations. But as a community, what matters most, and I felt it this way in my conversations with people, was that majority of the people don't care for the economy part. You know why? It's very strange. Because most of the people have come here from countries where there was rampant inflation, unavailability of goods and supplies. They have lived through the torture. They came to America, they found everything was so great. So, it's a very interesting statement. As the saying goes, it was attributed to Lyndon Johnson, perhaps. And, he's saying that talking about economy is like peeing in your pant. You are the only one who feels the tingling and the warmth. Rest of the people, it doesn't matter. Very, very strange statement, funny, weird, because people are more concerned about the family and values. Children are not an accidental tourist in our homes. They are part of our family upbringing and the values. So the Democratic Party agenda to undermine family as a unit is rather dangerous. And it's not only Indians, other Asians also feel the same way, that they value family as a unit. So LGBTQ, it's a dichotomy. The party that nourishes and cherishes and encourages LGBTQ is in relationship with Islamic people for whom these entire LGBTQ plus is anathema. So there is a dichotomy there, right? That's the reason why the Muslims are supporting Trump this time. They are endorsing Trump because a Pakistani friend of mine told me 2 years ago, because his son came back home and he said that, Abba Jan, I want to wear a girl's clothes, a 5-year-old kid. That guy got, you can imagine how sensationalized he got. He said, I don't want my son Muhammad going to school and returning as Mumtaz. That was his problem. And it's a genuine problem. Just as you and I will not want our girl Parvati going there and returning as Partho. So there is a definite problem in this entire scenario. So is LGBTQ DEI eliminating America's search for excellence and resorting to pandering to divisive issues? Rahulji, you first.
To what Mohanji said about the elections,
Yeah.
and that is, in 2005, there was a bipartisan report by James Baker III, and elections, right? And they started with a simple sentence saying the elections are the heart of democracy. And therefore, they had said that the greatest danger was in mail-in ballot. And it was a bipartisan thing. And it's stunning to see what they had recommended, right? And what they had recommended was, in 2005, universal up-to-date registration list open to the public, uniform voter ID system, professional and independent. Now, it was never implemented. Then, in 2021, they went back and said, public confidence in our elections continues to wane and the risk to our democracy is greater than ever. So in this case, you had institutions which have, in a bipartisan manner, declared that there is a problem, but they have not acted upon them. And consequently, there is a big problem because nobody has the willpower. And until that is solved, the crisis of confidence in the elections is going to continue. Only 35 states have a voter identification number. And that is really scandalous because you need a voter ID to get into the elevator of a building. So there is a deadlock there. Now, coming to the issue of, what matters is that to all the people who say, well, Trump is this, Trump is that, he's got a foul mouth, he gave a mean tweet at 3 a.m. or something of the sort. I think the simple answer is that it's the opposite of the the golden rule, and that is instead of doing to others as do to them, I think, how would you like this to be done to you? So, in other words, Indians should ask themselves, if you think opening up the border is fine, would you open up your house? If you think America first is problematic, would you put your family first to last? Just a moment.
Wherever he is, he's definitely vacationing.
Yeah. I'd like to add a few points after this regarding the elections and the system.
Yeah.
I don't want to invade in your privacy, but obviously you are vacationing somewhere. You're far away from a cold New York.
Where it's raining. So what I'm saying is that, would they like their daughters to be subjected to propaganda in the schools where they can say, oh, well, it's now time for you to change your gender? Would they like their daughters to compete against a man? Would they like all these things to happen? The most personal of all, well, if you've got a serious medical condition, would you like to be treated by a doctor who is a DEI candidate? So therefore, forget about the mean tweets and forget about the fact, what he does. What really matters is policies. And the only way to deal with it is to request people to put themselves in the shoes of being a receiving person. And then let us see, whether they experience cognitive dissonance or not, because they might, but that's the only way. Because, for the Democrats, their motto is, never underestimate the hypocrisy in the full. Never underestimate the importance of hypocrisy in getting power and money. But when people are asked to apply the policies to themselves, then there might be a glimmer of hope where the window opens.
Thank you. There is one more question that comes to my mind as we are heading towards our end of line for our conversation today. Is, a lot of people are saying that, Elon Musk has taken the huge risk. I mean, there were no billionaires in Trump camp earlier, but he himself said that I have very silent supporters of who are the silent majority, as the saying goes, and the silent majority is working. There are many people who are Trump supporters, individual capacity, rich or poor or not so poor or not so rich, who are silently voting for Trump. Otherwise, he wouldn't have got 71 million votes in the 2020 election. Now, there is a whole thing important here is that despite there was a data that was put up somewhere, the total number of registered voters were 134 million people. If 71 million voted for Trump, that means Biden could not have got more than, say, 60 million. If Trump's vote numbers are correct, then he couldn't have got that much vote. That said, number of billionaires who are supporting Trump, Musk has come out and truly X has revolutionized the information landscape totally. If it was under Jack and Agarwal, we won't be knowing hazard things that are happening on this, to put it in a colloquial language. Tell us something about that. Now, Jeff Bezos not endorsing, LA Times are not endorsing. It's a very interesting scenario. Are the billionaires realizing that they are getting into a tax trap by supporting this lady, Kamala Harris? Because Jamie Dimon, the Chase chief, says, I have had it with this SHIT with reference to the red tape and taxation. He was very categorical. It's only in America that people can use that word in a manner that it comes. How do you see this eventually shaping up in the final race?
So, Mohanji, please go first.
Yeah.
Sure. So I'll just go with a few basic, stats and numbers the way I see it, right? So regarding we should always be taxing the rich people. That slogan, if you can go back even 15, 20 years ago, that phrase hasn't changed. In fact, you can see President Obama saying that in 2008, and then, even all the way to 16, 20, you'll hear the same exact slogan from the Democrats.
I mean, sorry to interrupt. The word fair share is a Marxist terminology made polite. You know,
Right.
going
But
from Obama, even this lady Kamala is talking about the same thing, fair share. You know, like
correct. So those are very famous phrases. I'm just saying these were used all the way from 2008. Nothing has changed. And what is interesting is since 2008 to till 2024, as of 2024, you go to the Forbes, it's in Forbes magazine, their website, the total number of billionaires in terms of the net worth, two-thirds, I mean, three-fourths of them actually support Democrats and Harris. All right. And only a quarter of them support Trump, of all the billionaires, based on the net worth, right? Not the actual numbers, but based on the net worth. As in, you have Elon Musk on this side, but you also have from Microsoft, Bill Gates, and all of them the other side. But total net worth, if you look at it, three-fourths is supporting Harris, and one quarter of them are supporting Trump. This kind of a ratio was very similar all the way back in 2008. So essentially, all the billionaires in a substantial portion, just purely by the statistics and numbers, a large chunk of billionaires always supported the Democratic side, who have consistently said since 2008, they have been consistently saying that we should tax the rich people, we should do this and we should do that, and fair share. And they have given the same rhetoric. Sometimes it feels like billionaires are funding them to just say it so that people vote for it, but really not do anything about it, because they're not going to. It is, in some sense, I feel like it's feel like we have a drug problem, right? After the Prop 47 in California, like where fentanyl, everything is available on the street, free, pretty much, right? Anybody can go and get it with very little consequences. So it is like getting El Chapo and Pablo Escobar on your board to fight the drug cartels and saying that somehow I'm going to eliminate it. I feel that all this is basically sham. The fact that billionaires are leaving Harris, I don't think has anything to do with her taxation, because she is not going to do it. I feel the billionaires are sitting there to make sure they don't do anything. And like in any other advertisements where you have a very a poor person with all the ribs showing to talk about poverty, right? So they simply put up one person in Democrat, all of who eventually will become very, very rich over a period of time. And then the billionaires are going to prop them up, and they're going to give a nice, beautiful rhetoric on how they're going to tax the rich. But it has never happened. So I think that is a fake. I think with Trump and Musk, they too can actually purchase them, which they have done it in the past, because you can simply purchase all these people. They're pretty cheap, many of these politicians. But they chose to come, risk their entire business and everything, and taking a stance. And that is the important thing we need to observe in the Republican side. But otherwise, Democrats, I think it's a complete sham. I mean, the facts show that it's a sham. If you look at the statistics, all the billionaires, three-fourths of them, for every four, three of them are supporting the Democrats. And by the way, if you go back in the history, even in India, when we had socialistic principles, you have to remember that the billionaires and super rich people always support a socialistic idea, because that turns it into an oligarchy. So whether it was even the Tatas, Birlas in the past, Godrej, they all supported Congress party. And all the super rich people in China support the Communist Party. I'm just saying the socialism is such a setup that all the billionaires typically will support that system, who have this idea of the dictatorship of the proletariats, and to actually go against the rich people with all the rhetoric. The fact on the ground is they are basically oligarchs. Oligarchs support the socialism. And that's a beautiful pathway. That's the reason all the billionaires support Democrats.
fascinating observation, which I always say.
It's there in all the countries, everywhere. You go anywhere.
Anyway,
The rich people are with the oligarchs. Oligarchs are with the socialists.
So I think,
your take on this.
yeah. So first of all, starting with Elon Musk. So I think that the fact that, first of all, the man must be commended for moral courage, because it is a risk in terms of, what is going to be the electoral outcome. Secondly, the fact is that he is speaking from his heart. And thirdly, if you have a look at his tweets, the millions of views which he is getting shows that it is resonating with the people. Now, this is far more than you can purchase advertising. He says something, for instance, he explains, why is it that they want illegals to come inside? Because they want to increase their numbers, and therefore they are going to increase the number of congressmen, irrespective of the fact whether they have become, voters or not. So therefore, the power of the Democrats goes up. So he has put his finger on something which people are resonating with and responding to. Like, for instance, Trump diagnosed a problem. There was a problem with the swamp. There is, drain the swamp. We didn't know the problem, and diagnosis of the problem is, half the issue. Now, responding to Mohanji's point, I think the fact is that many of these organizations, they support a cheap labor. They like open borders because they want the lower cost, uh, and therefore one of the ways of getting it is simply open the borders. And the other day, I think one CNN lady, she asked, I think JD Vance, who's going to build the houses if we don't have illegals? So consequently, what they want is a very low paid labor class who is going to support their way of life. And consequently, let us have the people so that we do not have to go to these pesky Americans who we have to pay far more for doing the comparative work, right? Now, in that sense, it is called the Uni-Party. And let us see what happens in terms of the election results. You have some leading indicators that Trump is doing well in terms of the registration, in terms of the turnout. But it is Elon Musk is also fed up with the regulations, and because we know he's a visionary. And when his rocket was coming back, he said that he had a problem with NASA, and they said, well, you've got to do an analysis of what's going to happen to the sharks when your rocket is coming back. And so then they had a look at the ocean, and they said, oh, well, the sharks are not going to get injured. Then they said, well, what's going to happen to the dolphins? So he says, I'm fed up with this over-regulation. Over-regulations and taxation and redistribution of wealth are the standard leftist dogma which do not vary, whether it is India, whether it is UK, whether it is US. But at the same time, as Mohanji pointed out, there is a unspoken alliance going on, because how they benefit from a restricted market in which they can have cheap labor. So let's see what happens in this election. But this alignment, the Democrats have essentially become a party of the rich. They have essentially, they have essentially become a party of the rich. They have become a party of the coastal elites. America first. For instance, when they say, "Well, America first is evil," now, if you have a look at if I went to the editor of New York Times and said, well, if editor of the New York Times said, I'm going to put the New York Times first, obviously everybody would say yes. And what would happen? He said, oh, well, I'm going to put the Washington Times first. No, you're supposed to do what you're leading for the people who are representing.
Yep.
So this America First agenda, Elon Musk has really gambled, and I think the man needs absolute recognition for his courage, because it is a gamble. Because if they come to power, then they're going to go after him like you cannot believe it.
And you are right, because a lot of, just 1 minute, I just wanted to say you are right, because a lot of people, the Democratic side, the media is now talking about, don't fear Trump, fear Musk, what he will do to you as, Department of Efficiency and factoring that he's trying to do. Yes, Mohanji, go ahead.
Yeah, one thing I just want to mention is regarding the illegal immigrants, lowering the labor costs. The thing is, what I find it very hypocritical about the Democrats is that they want the minimum wage to be increased. So if they want the minimum wage to be increased, but you want the illegals to work, essentially you want to encourage some sort of slavery in your backyard. Somebody who is outside the purview of the government, who is going to do the cheap labor for you, who does not comply to this minimum wage. So to me, that is a slavery running in your backyard. To me, that is hypocrisy. All that they have to do is get rid of the minimum wage. You will have a lot of Americans who will work for the same price. You can say, I'll have the minimum wage to some $15, $20, and then have an illegal immigrant building the houses and other things for a price that is borderline slavery, right? So essentially, you are encouraging, it's not illegal immigrants, it's illegal labor, illegal everything. Essentially, we are having a whole parallel illegal system that is running in the country. So I am totally okay with lowering the labor costs, but there are legal ways of doing it. And we don't need, they can simply get away with, you cannot talk about the minimum wage and this at the same time, because that is somehow they don't talk to each other. Right here, you get the chunk of votes with the minimum wage. On the other side, you're actually having a slavery in your backyard. All right. And the last point is the regulation itself that people talk about. Regulation is essentially the government control. A country will run more efficiently a capitalistic system with minimum regulations. It's a way of somehow the government capturing it's like micromanaging the people and the businesses. That is not going to work. That is how the socialism runs, which is essentially micromanaging every aspect of how you run the business and what you do.
We are out of time. We are out of time. Very serious discussion. I wanted to thank you very much, both of you. But one last question here, 1 minute each to both of you. 2020 election, Trump is notorious for having been disagreeing with the outcomes of 2020 election. He still feels that he got cheated. Do you think the possibility of something similar happening this time? Will the trust factor that you talked about, Mohanji and Rahulji, both of you, will there be trust in the election process this time? And who must we vote for? Who is likely to win? I'm not going to ask you who must you vote for, but who do you think is likely to win? If, as Trump says, if it is a fair election. Go ahead, both of you, a minute each. Be concise, pointed, sharp.
In terms of the irregularities, it has been established that there is very little trust in the system in terms of the voting procedures. And this is not what I'm saying. This is what the bipartisan, James Baker and Jimmy Carter have said as recently as 2021. The fact that there are no, voter ID laws, the fact that there are no public auditable, trails, the fact that there are no lists of, voters which is publicly available, the fact that their voter rolls are not regularly purged of dead people who have gone away. There is a lot of problems out there, and frankly speaking, it is very difficult to have absolute trust in the American voting system. We in India do much better. We have a voting system which gives the results of 650 million people in 2 hours. Americans are not capable of that. It is a system which is drowning in complexity and diversity, and therefore both sides are lawyering up, quote unquote. And one wonders what's going to happen. And I think that one hopes for the best, but one really must be prepared for the worst.
Thank you. Mohanji, your last word.
So what I think is, yes, there is, like I had mentioned before, the idea of the trust is very important in systems. And what you have in America is the equivalent of having a grocery store that is unmanned, don't have closed circuit cameras, nothing. You expect people to take things from there and deposit the money honestly. And then there's one team that claims that there is no theft because there is no proof. So all that I'm saying is, if we don't have a voter ID check, now nothing may ever be proven in court. But I'm saying the fact that nobody is checking it to believe that everything is honest is kind of a stretch. And if if they really want to make it trustworthy, it is not that difficult. America has all the technology to implement it like overnight, but they just don't do it. So that makes it very suspicious on why don't you want to do it? Why can't you just check, right? And the fact that they insist on not checking makes it even more suspicious. So other than that, unless they can fix this, there's going to be a very serious trust deficit, and that is not good for the country. They have to fix the trust before they can fix anything else in democracy.
Thank you. Thank you very much, both of you, Rahulji and Mohanji. Great conversation. Very happy. And I hope the viewers make their choice, because your choice is the one it is critical, because you are choosing what you want. What you want can't go against you. Think about it from that perspective. So with these words, I want to say, ending this conversation today, Satyameva Jayate, for truth to triumph, you got to fight for it. Truth
Namaste.
installs trust. That's what is important. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Namaste.
Namaste.